This man stabbed his mum to death over Avril Lavigne tickets. In March 2008, 39-year-old Robert Lyons was living in Chicago. He'd been living with his mother for about a year, 61-year-old Linda Bolek. The pair had apparently not been getting on very well at all and had several arguments in the lead up to the fateful day. On the 14th of March, Robert saw that there were tickets going for an Avril Lavigne concert. He was so desperate to go that he would kill for these tickets. His mum actually refused to buy Robert the tickets, and in a rage, Robert hit her over the head with a bottle of champagne. He then stabbed her 9 times. The attack was actually so brutal that he ended up breaking the weapon. Not content with savagely killing his mother, he then poured household cleaner all over her before leaving the house. He then casually went to a bookshop, bought a book, and drove round for a few hours. Authorities ended up hunting him down and finding him at a local Hooters bar. Robert's defense in court was that he suffered with mental illness. He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and was apparently not taking his medication at the time of the killing. He was eventually sentenced to 40 years in prison for this absolutely hideous crime. This true crime case from Northern Ireland is heartbreaking. 21-year-old Chloe Mitchell was from Ballymena. She vanished on the 2nd of June 2023. She'd been out that evening and was spotted on CCTV heading towards James Street in the early hours of the morning. She was reported missing, and understandably her family were absolutely beside themselves. On the 9th of June, police confirmed that they'd launched a criminal investigation. Then 2 days later came the news that the family were absolutely dreading. Human remains had been discovered at a nearby flat in James Street. They were then formally identified as Chloe's. Police revealed that she did suffer a violent death, but they have not yet released to the public how she died. Her family, though, have been made aware. 26-year-old Brandon Rainey was arrested on suspicion of her murder. His defence applied for him to be held in a secure mental health unit due to the fact that he's a diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic. He is known to have been an inpatient at the facility before. Chloe's family is understandably heartbroken, and the local community have all come together to grieve the young woman. This Derbyshire crime case is horrific. Police were called to a house in Killamarsh in 2021. It was 7:26 a.m. on the 19th of September. What they were told when they arrived stunned them. Outside was Damien Bendel. He chillingly told police that he'd murdered 4 people inside of the house. He was arrested at the scene, and what officers discovered would haunt them. 35-year-old Terry Harris had lived in the house along with her children, 13-year-old John Paul Bennett and 11-year-old Lacey Bennett. Also deceased inside the property was Lacey's best friend, 11-year-old Connie Gent, who'd been there for a sleepover. Damien and Terry had been in a relationship after meeting on a dating website. Prior to the murders, and this is a massive trigger warning for animals here, Damien had bragged that a friend couldn't afford to take their dog to the vet, so he'd killed it using a brick. He was a known substance user and used a lot of CO and CA. On the day in question, the 4 victims were found deceased in the house with their skulls crushed. He had AR'd 11-year-old Lacey as she died. After the killings, he went to town to get more substances and was spotted on CCTV going to a shop to buy tobacco. He took John Paul's Xbox and traded it in for substances. When making polite conversation with Damien, a cab driver reported that he told him his night had been a bit mad. He was given a whole life order in prison, and the house has since been demolished. This case will make you terrified to leave work. It was the 22nd of November 2003. Drew Shadin was leaving work for the day. She worked in a shopping centre in a Victoria's Secret in North Dakota. She was an incredibly popular woman, and she was actually homecoming queen and a member of a sorority. As she left work that day, she rang her boyfriend. Now, during the conversation, he heard Drew state, okay, and then the phone went dead. He presumed maybe she'd bumped into somebody that she knew, or the signal had just dropped. He waited, but didn't actually hear back from her for 3 hours. At that point, he received a call off her number, and all he could hear was a fuzzy sound and the sound of buttons being pressed. It became apparent that something was seriously wrong when Drew didn't turn up to her second job that she was scheduled to attend. Terrifyingly, when her car was found in the car park, police noticed a knife sheath next to it. Police attempted to scour the CCTV to try and put together Drew's movements. They figured out she was abducted just 4 minutes into her phone call. Chillingly, when they looked on CCTV, they could see a man following her. They identified him as a known offender Alfonso Rodriguez. Terrifyingly, he had an extensive history of violence against women. Shockingly, he'd actually been released from prison not long before this. This was despite being labelled as likely to reoffend. Even his own family had expressed their concerns about him being released. Now, he attempted to use the alibi of having been at the cinema at the time of the abduction. However, the film that he said he was watching wasn't actually being shown at any local cinemas that day. When they searched his vehicle, they found something very disturbing. There was a knife that had clearly been cleaned and also drops of Drew's blood. Police arrested him on suspicion of murder. In April 2004, her body was finally discovered. She was found without clothes on along the Red Lake River. Up until April, it had actually been quite bad weather. There was snow, there was frost, so this may have been why it took so long to find her. She had multiple knife wounds and had been SA'd before her death. Alfonso originally got the death penalty, but this was then changed to life in prison after appeal. Drew's law came into place after her killing, and a scholarship was set up in her memory. This teenager killed his teacher in the school toilets. Philip Chisholm was 14 years old. It was autumn 2013 and he'd recently moved areas. He'd been living in Tennessee and had to move to Massachusetts. His mum was going through a really difficult divorce, and at the time Philip was said to be quite reclusive. Colleen Ritzer was one of the teachers at his school. She was always positive and encouraging of students, and Philip was no exception. Colleen had actually been heard to be complimenting Philip on his artwork in class, but he seemed to then have a problem with her mentioning his recent move. He became visibly upset and she tried to change the subject. She thought that this was the end of this awkward encounter. It was the morning of the 22nd of October and CCTV picked up Philip arriving at school. He was carrying several bags, which no one knew at the time were actually filled with a box cutter, mask, gloves and a change of clothes. Later that day, Colleen was also captured on CCTV, leaving her classroom to go to the toilet. It was roughly around 3 p.m. Philip was again captured on CCTV, but this time he was following Colleen and pulling his hood up. Chillingly, he put gloves on and stalked her into the toilets. Stealing her phone and her bank card off her, he launched a hideous attack. He AR'd her and then stabbed her 16 times with the weapons he'd packed. A student even apparently walked in halfway through but saw a pile of clothes on the floor and presumed somebody was trying to get changed. Less than 10 minutes after following her into the bathroom, he left the school, got changed and came back wearing a white top. Shockingly, he went back into the toilets and left pulling a bin which housed Colleen's body. He took the bin into a wooded area behind the school and shockingly SA'd Colleen's body again. When both individuals were missing after school, the police got involved. They found Colleen's blood in the toilets and blood-soaked clothes near a path in the woods. When they examined CCTV, they made Philip a suspect. Meanwhile, Philip was using his teacher's bank card to buy a cinema ticket. When he left the cinema, he stole a knife from a shop and was then obviously stopped by police. They found Colleen's ID and purse on him, as well as the incriminating murder weapon. He admitted to police where he had buried her, and when police discovered Colleen's body, a note lay next to her. The note simply said, "I hate you all." He was tried as an adult and sentenced to at least 40 years in prison. This is one of the biggest twists in a UK true crime case that I've ever come across. It was 2015 in Cambridgeshire. Ricardas Pusis, originally from Lithuania, came to the UK for a better life. He was a hard-working man and got a job on a local leek farm. However, things would take a horribly dark turn for Ricardas. He vanished in September 2015. Police were informed that he had left work in Chatteris on the 26th of September. He then met up with a group of other Lithuanian men socially that evening. However, the alarm was raised when he didn't show up to work 2 days later. Concerningly, his ID badge was then found in a local park. Police received shocking tip-offs stating that he'd been exploited, and they launched a murder investigation in November 2015. They utilised all resources they had to try and attempt to find his body. Then in December, a breakthrough. A 31-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of murder. Despite having not found Ricardas, the investigation was progressing. The man was questioned about his contact with Ricardas prior to him going missing. Disturbingly, witnesses reported that the pair had got into a physical altercation after the man told Ricardus that he owed him £1,000. The man then allegedly hit Ricardus over the head and blood had been pouring out. Ricardus was then shockingly beaten with a pole and was seen stumbling around. That was the last time the witnesses saw him. However, despite this disturbing account, the man was released by police. Frustratingly, the case hit a lot of dead ends and the police was stumped. Then, 4 years later, in 2019, his sister got a Facebook message. She had obviously feared the worst for her brother after the original murder investigation. However, the Facebook message was of somebody claiming to be Ricardus. She told police she was convinced it was her brother. Investigators actually traced the profile and found that it was being used through the Wi-Fi of a nearby Asda. They obviously had suspicions that this may just be somebody posing as the missing man. An agonizing 6 months later, after trained negotiators stepped in, Ricardus was found alive. Astonishingly, he'd actually been living in the woods off Harecroft Road for 5 years. He had a makeshift hut and kept himself remarkably clean. He'd scavenged for food and used old discarded clothing that he found. He even found someone's old phone and was able to use it through the Asda Wi-Fi. He avoided people and stayed in his hut throughout the day. Understandably scared and vulnerable, Ricardus was spoken to by police officers who tried to reassure him. He would eventually speak about his experience. He stated about the beating before he disappeared. "It was very painful. I couldn't stand up. I turned around to the door and ran. I didn't know where to go. I turned left, there was a little park. I went to the park and hid in the bushes." The man that was actually released by police during the investigation currently has a warrant out for his arrest over allegations of modern slavery. I can now solve crime cases on my commute to work. If you love Cluedo like me, but you maybe live alone or you just can't randomly take a board game around with you, then you're in luck. Uncover clues by interviewing suspects, finding evidence, and check out the amazing new modernized characters. Cluedo is now available on iOS, Android, and Steam on PC. The best part is if you have a long plane or tube journey and you're not able to use the internet, you can still play offline. You can play single player versus AI to banish boredom on your commute. If you're a true crime fan, I guarantee you will love this game. This man killed his brother for not thanking him for cooking dinner. It was the 7th of March 2003 in Wainuiomata, New Zealand. A family meal was underway. 36-year-old Fergus Glenn had made dinner at his parents' house. One of the people he had cooked for was his 33-year-old brother, Craig. Craig was a family man with a wife and 3 children. It's believed that the pair had an ongoing feud, and on the day in question, Craig not thanking Fergus for cooking appeared to be the final straw. That evening, Craig went to sleep unaware of the horrors that would unfold. Shortly after, his mum woke to the sound of blows coming from the room that Craig was sleeping in. She initially thought this sounded like a wood chipper. She got up to investigate and found Fergus on the stairs. He calmly told his mum, "I've done him with an axe." Fergus had chillingly struck his brother 8 times with the weapon. It is likely that Craig knew very little about the attack. Experts claimed that it would be likely that the first strike would have killed him straight away or at least knocked him unconscious. Later in 2003, Fergus pleaded guilty in court. He was sentenced to a lifetime term with a minimum of 10 years. Did you know about the Harry Potter actor that got sent to prison? You may remember Jamie Waylett, who played the Hogwarts bully Vincent Crabbe in the Harry Potter films. Although for many actors this would be a dream come true to be in such well-known films, Jamie reportedly struggled with the fame. He began to use substances in order to cope with his mental health struggles. In 2012, London saw some of the most devastating riots, including looting and arson, as well as the deaths of 5 people. Jamie was arrested for being involved in the riots. He was pictured getting involved in looting and holding a bottle full of petrol. He was also with a gang of at least 4 people who went into Chalk Farm on the 8th of August. He also had a previous conviction for substance possession at that time. In 2012, he received a 2-year sentence for violent disorder and 12 months for handling stolen goods. It's believed that since being released from prison, he hasn't been in any big films. This teenager's life was cut short by a horrific knife crime. Oliver King Onzilla had just celebrated his 19th birthday. He was a very promising young football player. He captained Barnet's youth team and the England College's FA team in a match against Italy. Teammates described him having amazing power and strength on the pitch. His future was looking extremely bright. However, this would all change on one tragic evening out in London. His mum would last speak to him on the 12th of September 2008. Tragically, this would be the last time she would speak to her teenage son. He was enjoying a night out with friends at Southend's E-Bar. This is when a commotion broke out involving 3 people. Oliver was stabbed at 1:15 a.m. He was rushed to a local hospital where he tragically passed away at 2:20 a.m. A post-mortem found that he died of stab wounds. Tristan Burke was given a minimum of 14 years in prison for the killing. Shockingly disgusting videos emerged online of Tristan posting from his prison cell. Videos show him wearing a balaclava while rapping about violence. Thankfully, the Ministry of Justice got his Instagram account taken down. Oliver's family made the brave decision to have him in an open casket at his funeral. He has a clear wound on his face, and the family wanted to do this in order to spread awareness about the destruction caused by knife crime. This bank robber got caught after falling into a recycling bin. The alarm was raised from a bank around 2 a.m. on the 26th of July in Ohio. Police heard noises coming from the roof over the bank's drive-through. There happened to be a recycling bin directly underneath. This turned out to have been placed there by the suspect initially to help him climb up through the roof access door. However, when he dropped down from the roof into the recycling bin, officers were able to arrest him. The suspect is 27-year-old Tristan Heidel. He allegedly explained to the officers that he'd simply robbed the bank due to being broke. He was charged with breaking and entering, possession of criminal tools, and safecracking. One policeman said he had never seen a case as horrific as this one in his entire career. When 16-year-old Kellyanne Bates told her mum about her boyfriend, she was shocked. Margaret lived with her daughter in Hattersley, England, and they lived a fairly ordinary life. However, Margaret was shocked to learn that her teenage daughter's boyfriend was in his mid-40s. Other than being unhappy about the obvious age gap, Margaret found her daughter's boyfriend, James Smith, deeply disturbing. Now, the pair had apparently met when Kelly was only 14 years old. They had been keeping their relationship secret until now. Soon after this, Kelly moved in with unemployed James. It seemed that as time went on, she became more quiet and reserved. On the odd occasion that her parents did see her, they noticed marks on her arms. Margaret tried to report this to police, but all police did was give her some leaflets to give to Kelly to try and encourage her to leave. Little did they know James had a dark past. He had actually been married before and had got divorced over allegations against him of DV. Other exes shared similar stories of abuse. It's believed that he once even tried to drown a 15-year-old girlfriend. James was unfortunately no different to Kelly. He would regularly abuse her, and the teenager suffered in silence. In April 1996, his violence reached a whole new level. On the 16th of April, he walked into a police station to announce that he had accidentally killed Kelly. He stated they'd had an argument while she was in the bath and she'd accidentally drowned. However, when police arrived at the pair's home, they found a horrendous scene. Police discovered Kelly's body and the house was smeared with her blood. The pathologist found over 150 injuries on her body, and these were determined to have taken place over a period of a month. The true horror of what Kelly went through is unimaginable. She had been tortured for weeks up to her death. James had starved her and tied her to a radiator by her hair. She'd been burned with an iron, strangled and stabbed. She had been scalped and her eyeballs were gouged out at least 5 days prior to him drowning her in the bath. Shockingly, there are even more horrific injuries if you would wish to Google these. At his trial, other abuse victims of James testified against him. James, however, argued that he was the real victim. He said, "She put me through hell, winding me up." In 1997, he was sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in prison, and he remains there to this day. Police say that this man killed a woman and posted a video of her dying online. On the 26th of July, police in Nevada received a report of a disturbing video on Facebook. Police were actually able to locate the telephone number of the person who posted the video due to the seriousness of the crime. They tracked the number to an apartment complex in San Mateo. As police did not have a specific address to go to, they had to go door to door around the whole apartment complex. After 3 hours, they were able to locate a deceased person in one of the apartments. They identified the suspect as Mark Merchikoff and they arrested him. The video that was posted on Facebook allegedly shows Mark stabbing the victim. He callously filmed the victim's last moments of life. Police say that the motive is still unknown. Mark is currently charged with murder. There has been a breakthrough in the cold case killing of a 12-year-old girl. In 1993, 12-year-old Jennifer Odom was about to walk home. She was last seen getting off the school bus in Pasco County. Tragically, she never made it home that day. 6 days later, police made a hideous discovery. Her body was found along a horse riding trail in Hernando County. Her body showed signs that she had been brutally attacked and murdered. Originally, there was a hunt for a driver of a blue pickup truck who had been seen in the area by eyewitnesses. Unfortunately, her case has remained cold for all of these years up until now. A breakthrough has come in this case in the form of biological material collected from another crime. Months prior to Jennifer's death, another local teen in the area was attacked and SA'd. Through DNA analysis, 61-year-old Jeffrey Crum has been identified as the prime suspect. Police have worked for years gathering evidence against the suspect. Interestingly, he did own a blue pickup truck and was local to the area at the time that Jennifer was abducted. The state attorney has said the following: "I have confidence that we have the right person and that we have the right aggravators in this particular case to treat it as a death penalty case." Jeffrey has been charged with murder, kidnapping, and battery. Did you know the opening to this horror film was based on a crazy true crime case? The opening scene of Jeepers Creepers features two people driving down the road with a van tailgating them. It's a scene that is reminiscent of a reenactment done on the Unsolved Mysteries program in 1991. The case in question involves Ray and Marie Thompson, siblings who were just driving down the road one day outside of Michigan. In their rearview mirror, they noticed a suspicious van. Now, the van initially passed them and they did notice that he seemed to be in a hurry. Shortly after, they passed the van again, but this time they noticed it was parked outside an abandoned schoolhouse. The driver appeared to be holding a blood-soaked sheet. Although they did drive past, yet again they noticed the van shortly after in their rearview mirror. It was driving aggressively close to them for the next 2 miles, just like the opening scene in Jeepers Creepers. The siblings turned off the highway and discussed what they should do. They decided to turn the car back around and try and get a good view of the number plate to report to the police. However, when they approached the van again, they noticed that the mystery man was crouching down and changing the number plates. They were also shocked to see inside the open door of the van was covered in blood. They immediately called police, who were actually already on the hunt for the male van driver and his wife. Dennis Depew was the man in question. In 1971, he had married Marilyn. They did have 3 children together, but Dennis was very controlling. Marilyn filed for divorce in 1989 and Dennis moved out. However, Dennis would regularly freak Marilyn out by letting himself into the house. One day she came home to find him sat on the sofa, even though she had changed all of the locks. On Easter Sunday, 1990, Dennis arrived at her house to collect 2 of the children. However, Dennis became angry at Marilyn during the visit and ended up pushing her down the stairs. With their children watching on in horror, Dennis beat Marilyn and dragged her out of the house. Their eldest daughter ran to a neighbour's house to try and ring police, but it was too late. Dennis drove off with Marilyn in the van, lying to his children that he was taking her to the hospital. Responding to the eyewitness reports, the forensic team taped off the schoolhouse crime scene. They discovered Marilyn's body the day after by the roadside. She had been shot in the head. Police were now on the hunt for Dennis as he drove across the country. On March the 20th, a woman returned to her house to see her boyfriend's van on the drive. She believed that her boyfriend's name was Hank. He told her that he needed to rush home as his mum was very unwell. Meanwhile, the TV in the house was playing an Unsolved Mysteries episode. The episode featured news of a man called Dennis who was wanted for murder. Hank, whose real name was Dennis, was desperately trying to distract his girlfriend from the episode. He was terrified that if she saw the TV, she would recognize him. At this point, Dennis drove off, but the police were on his tail. A 15-mile high-speed car chase ensued. Officers rammed his van and forced him off the road, but seconds later, Dennis pulled the trigger and unalived himself. We have an update in the case of the body in the suitcases in Florida. Last month, the body parts of a female victim were found in suitcases in Florida. We now know the victim's identity and a man has been arrested. The victim was identified as 80-year-old Adil Fontes from dental records. Her husband, William Lowe, is accused of murdering her. They had been married for 15 years. The 78-year-old has been arrested on charges of murder and abuse of a dead body. Police claim that William shot his wife in the head at their home in Florida. He then allegedly dismembered her. Now, originally 3 suitcases had been found with body parts in, but shortly after, a tote bag was found with the victim's head in with a gunshot wound. A body in a barrel recently washed up on a beach in Malibu. Police in Los Angeles were stunned when they got reports of a deceased male inside of a barrel. The discovery was made when it washed up on the shore on Malibu Lagoon State Beach on the 31st of July. A lifeguard had noticed the plastic barrel floating in the water at roughly 10 a.m. The lifeguard went to investigate and was horrified when he opened up the barrel and found a dead body inside. At first, all we knew was that the body was male and had no clothes on. He has now been identified as 32-year-old Yovanta Murphy. He was a singer-songwriter and a rapper. We do know that he had spent some time in jail previously and had been ordered to do some DV classes. Police have launched an investigation and as of yet we do not know the cause of death. This man rang an ambulance for his unresponsive wife. He's now charged with her murder. On the 12th of January 2023, Glennis Smith rang an ambulance. He claimed that his wife, Jennifer Smith Floyd, was not breathing. He stated that she was unconscious. Now, the pair from California had actually been married for 5 years, but it's believed that they'd been living separately. When emergency services arrived at the scene, they found Jennifer deceased. Now, investigators started looking into Jennifer's death, and they found that there was a fatal dose of a substance in her system. Police allege that Glennis put this substance into Jennifer's food without her knowing on 2 occasions. Court records also show that he had spent some time in prison for R-ing his ex-wife. Now, a few months after Jennifer's death, the couple's trailer actually went up in flames. Police allege that Glennis set this fire on purpose. He's been arrested and is currently being held on charges of murder, arson, and insurance fraud. What happened in this quiet neighborhood is absolutely terrifying. Maddie Clifton was born in Jacksonville, Florida. She was a carefree child who was playing outside on November the 3rd, 1998. In the early 90s, 14-year-old Joshua Phillips and his family moved in across the street. Behind closed doors, Joshua's dad was violent towards his wife and son. He was known to be even more aggressive if there were children playing in his house when he wasn't there. The day in question, Joshua was outside playing baseball when Maddie came up to him and asked if she could play. As Joshua's parents were out, he was hesitant about this, but he did say yes. He stated that while they were playing, he accidentally hit her in the face with a ball. When she started crying, he was afraid that people would find out that she'd been playing there. He wanted to try and stop the commotion. He attacked her with a baseball bat and strangled her to try and prevent anyone finding out. With the child unconscious, he shoved her under his waterbed. At around 5 p.m. that day, Maddie's frantic mother called police to report her daughter missing. Before the day was over, Joshua returned his attention to Maddie. He stabbed her 7 times to make sure that she was dead and left her under his bed for an entire week. The community came out in force to hunt for the little girl. Joshua's parents even joined in with the search. Now, police did end up searching local houses, including Joshua's. When they were in his house, they noticed a smell. Putting this down to simply the pets that the family owned, police turned a blind eye. On the 10th of November, Joshua's mum was cleaning his room and found what she thought to be his waterbed leaking. On closer inspection, she made the hideous discovery. She ran outside to call police for help. Joshua was arrested and the community was stunned. He was sentenced to life without parole. Although this was reviewed later on due to the age he was when he committed the crime, the sentence was upheld. What this girl did to herself will make you feel physically sick. This is one of the most shocking cases of psychosis I've ever heard. On February the 6th, 2018, Kaylee Muthart was using substances. She was high on M after a 48-hour binge. She ended up stumbling down the road next to a railway track. In her substance-induced state, she believed that she needed to save the world, and in order to do so, she needed to make a sacrifice. Horrifically, she believed that she needed to scrape her eyeballs out of her head or everybody would die. So that's exactly what she did. With her bare hands, she removed her own eyeballs. She then squashed them into her hands while a passerby struggled to restrain her. She was airlifted to hospital in South Carolina. She is now obviously completely blind, but thankfully is sober. She's a mother to a toddler and she wants to help people through them hearing her story. A 10-year-old boy was found dead in a bin at his mum's house. In Rock Island, Illinois, there has recently been a sickening discovery. A 10-year-old boy called Zion was found deceased in a bin in a garage. An autopsy has taken place and his death is being treated as suspicious. Shockingly, it's believed that he was deceased for around 7 months. A neighbour spoke to reporters and said that she was wondering why it took police so long to find the missing boy and how they found him in the bin. The child's mother, 37-year-old Sushi Staples, has been arrested. It's believed that an anonymous source contacted the police about weird things that Sushi was saying in relation to her son. On January the 3rd, Sushi allegedly said to her neighbour that Christmas would never be the same again. On July the 25th, the neighbour made another anonymous call, and police decided to do a welfare check. The investigation into Zion's death continues. This Bumble Day ended with a man being killed. 17-year-old Emma Cusack met 36-year-old Charlie on Bumble dating app. Charlie is believed to be from Glendale, California, but he was allegedly visiting Las Vegas on June the 28th. Contacting Emma via Bumble, he asked if she wanted to hang out that evening. The pair went to get alcohol and then they went back to Charlie's hotel room at the Luxor Hotel. It's believed that during the evening, Charlie showed Emma his handgun. Emma claimed that she grabbed it and shot it when Charlie was about to attack her. She said that they'd gotten into an argument. However, Emma did then change her story and said that she shot Charlie because he was kicking her out of his hotel room and she planned to rob him. Emma said that Charlie went to grab the weapon and so did she. Emma then rang police to report that she'd shot somebody in the hotel room. She states that she didn't intend to and she simply acted on impulse. She turned herself into police and she was booked at the Clark County Detention Center on her birthday when she turned 18. She's currently being held on a murder charge. This beauty queen is accused of killing her husband over an apparent affair. In 2020, Lindsay Shiver posted one of her wedding photos online. She had married football player Robert Shiver and called theirs a perfect marriage. However, it transpires that this couldn't be further from the truth. Lindsay is a 36-year-old former Miss Houston County, and Robert once signed for the NFL's Atlanta Falcons. The pair have 3 children together and a stunning Bahamas home, as well as a house in Thomasville, Georgia. Now, according to court documents, Robert filed for divorce on the 5th of April after stating that Lindsay was having an affair. On the 28th of July, Lindsay was accused of planning to have her ex killed. According to news outlets, police were actually looking for a suspect for an unrelated break-in at Grabber's Bed Bar and Grill. Police came across WhatsApp messages on Lindsay's phone relating to the alleged murder plot. Lindsay has been arrested along with a 28-year-old male who is believed to be her boyfriend. A man called Farron Newbold was also arrested as the apparent hitman. This little girl was sold to a man by her own mother. Within 24 hours, she was dead. It was 5:30 on the morning of the 10th of November 2009. Brenda Davis and her partner were sleeping. Suddenly, they woke to a noise. The noise sounded like someone was trying to break into the trailer. Then Brenda's sister Antoinette shouted that her 5-year-old daughter Shania was missing. Brenda begged for Antoinette to call the police, but for some reason she was hesitant. Although she did eventually call, when she was questioned by police, her story seemed to change. When Antoinette was first interviewed, there was good news. Shania had been captured on CCTV, so they had a lead. The footage captured the little girl at a nearby hotel with a mystery man. At first, Antoinette incorrectly identified this man as her boyfriend. Police quickly arrested him, but they found out that he actually had an alibi. He was obviously not the man in question, and Antoinette eventually confessed to lying. The true story of what happened that night is sickening. The real kidnapper was Mario McNeil. On the night in question, he was drunk at home with his girlfriend. He had decided to text his ex, Brenda Davis. When she didn't reply to him, he planned to break into her trailer. Mario then took the little girl. As if this wasn't shocking enough, he actually didn't take the little girl of his own accord. Her mother had sold her to him. She later explained that this was to settle a $200 debt to him. In another disgusting twist, Antoinette would later tell the police that she simply intended Mario to her daughter and return her to her. This was her 5-year-old daughter. Meanwhile, the local community was hunting for the little girl. Hundreds of volunteers came out to search for her, and her dad Bradley made an emotional plea for her return. On the 13th of November, Mario turned himself in. He was charged with kidnapping. Police then found out that Antoinette had sold her daughter to him and arrested her too. Tragically, on November the 16th, Shania's body was found in the woods. An autopsy showed that she had been SA'd and smothered. Mario, quite honestly, was convicted of more crimes than I can list and was sentenced to death. Shockingly, Antoinette was pregnant when she was arrested. Thankfully, when she gave birth, the child was placed into foster care. She was sentenced to at least 17 years in prison and will have to remain on the S offenders list for at least 30. She remains in prison to this day. Her mother's body was found in the woods in 2007 and has just been identified. So why did her family never report her missing? This developing story is incredibly intriguing. In 2007, a decomposing body was found in Sarasota. The body was found in a shallow grave, but unfortunately due to the amount of decomposition, they were unable to identify who the victim was. It's been 16 years since the discovery of her body, and we now have some answers. However, these answers are raising more questions. Investigators were able to use new advancements in technology to identify the woman as Gina Burrus, a 39-year-old mother. She previously lived on Pauline Avenue in Sarasota with her husband James and their son James Jr. Florida police are now appealing to the public for help. They wish to speak to anyone familiar with the victim or her husband, who apparently never reported her missing. Her husband James worked at a body shop on Sarah Avenue, and James Jr. went to Gulf Gate Elementary School between 2005 and 2006. The two no longer live in their previous family home, and police have searched the property and found nothing, according to the new owner.
It's just a cigarette, and it cannot be that bad. Honey, don't you love me?
Remember this man of Family Feud? He joked that he regretted marrying his wife and he was then accused of her murder. If you haven't seen my previous video, click this comment and watch the original video. Well, we now have an update in this case. In June, Tim was actually convicted of killing his wife. Rebecca Bleefnick was found deceased in February 2023 in her home in Quincy. She was a mum to 3 young boys. Now, Tim had filed for divorce in 2021 and had attacked Rebecca in a jealous rage after seeing another man's car on her drive on Valentine's Day. He ended up going home and searching for the number plate on his computer. The car actually belonged to Ted Johnson, Rebecca's new boyfriend. Tim then returned to Rebecca's house 9 days later and shot her 14 times at close range. Authorities actually found internet searches on Tim's computer of how to break into a window with a crowbar and how to create a homemade silencer. On Friday, he was sentenced to 3 life sentences. So this happened on Sunday. A man has been charged with aggravated assault and other charges after police alleged that he intentionally crashed his car into a Pennsylvania home. This resulted in the vehicle being lodged in the home's roof and the second story. At around 3:15 p.m. on the 6th of August, an incident occurred in Mifflin County, Pennsylvania. A 20-year-old called Evan Miller allegedly drove his vehicle into this home on purpose. Police stated in a news release that they believed that this was an intentional act. Joan Lepley, whose house was the one in question, says that she was with her cousins when they all heard a commotion. Joan heard her relatives shout to her, "There's a man on your roof and there's a car on your roof." The vehicle is thought to have collided with the embankment outside of the house, causing the car to propel upwards into the roof. Thankfully, because of where the car hit on the roof of the house, nobody was injured. If it had hit the ground floor of the house, it could have been a very different outcome. The driver has been charged with multiple charges, including aggravated assault, recklessly endangering another person, and obviously careless driving. This terrifying house of horrors is where a victim in Dudley was killed. Julia Rawson was 42 when she was enjoying a drink in a pub in Dudley in May 2019. She was actually a talented musician and an all-round fun-loving woman. Unfortunately for Julia, the night in question, she met Nathan Maynard Ellis. The 30-year-old was fascinated with gore and horror films. Inside his Tipton flat were swords, knives, and spiders mounted on the walls. Julia was obviously completely unaware that the man had an obsession with decapitation and death when she agreed to have a drink with him. They eventually went back to Nathan's place. Julia would enter the flat dubbed as the House of Horrors that evening, completely unaware that Nathan had actually gone out that night with the intention of finding a victim. Along with his partner, 25-year-old David Leasley, Nathan brutally killed Julia. Her remains, including her severed head, hands and feet, were found at separate locations, including at a canal and on wasteland. Police identified Nathan from CCTV at the pub and he was arrested on suspicion of kidnap. When officers searched his flat, they discovered a bloodstain underneath new underlay in the living room. Now, after he was arrested for murder, a woman came forward to state that Nathan had actually R''d her and made threats to kill. He was found guilty on R charges in relation to this. At their murder trial, the judge stated that both men attacked Julia and then engaged in a calm and thorough cover-up. In 2020, Nathan and David were sentenced. Nathan got a minimum of 30 years, while David got a minimum of 19. 2 women have been killed and the killer remains at large. 2 women, including a Florida barmaid, have been shot while waiting at a train crossing. 28-year-old Paige Pringle is one of the victims. She was found in San Marco on the 9th of August around 1:40 a.m. She had multiple gunshot wounds and was found inside an SUV. The second woman, Tara Baker, was found outside the SUV and died later in hospital. Now, the SUV is believed to have been waiting at the train crossing when gunfire was heard. This caused the car to crash into the moving train. It's believed that these women did not actually know each other. Police have not identified any suspects or made any arrests at this time. Imagine picking up a hitchhiker only to discover later that he was wanted on murder charges and allegedly carrying his victim's severed head. A man in Georgia recently had the realization that he may have picked up a killer hitchhiker. Russell Jimerson was traveling with his son in the car at the time. A friend ended up informing Russell about the arrest of 23-year-old murder suspect Keegan Phillips. Now, disturbingly, Russell had actually noticed that the hitchhiker had a backpack that smelt disgusting. He's now coming to terms with the fact that a severed head may have been in that bag. Keegan Phillips, who is pictured here, has since been arrested, and police dogs also found human remains in a shallow grave. Police believe that it was the body of Martha Ledford, who was reported missing several days prior. Also arrested is Robert Bob Peppers. He's a 62-year-old man who has been arrested for dumping a dead body. This murder was solved by the killer's mysterious tweet. Skylar Neese, Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schoaf were best friends. On social media, the trio seemed inseparable. However, a glance at Skylar's Twitter account would have raised concerns. One particular tweet stated, "Thanks a lot, friends. Love hanging out with you all too." It's believed that Skylar's so-called friends were leaving her out intentionally. After midnight on the 6th of July 2012, Skylar snuck out of her bedroom window. CCTV captured her getting into a car at around 12. The next day, when her parents discovered she was missing, they were worried sick. They rang police, but no Amber Alert was issued due to her age. During the initial search for the missing girl, the local community handed out flyers to raise awareness. Skylar's friend Sheila joined them. She also became very close with Skylar's parents, seemingly joining in their grief. When police interviewed them, Sheila and Rachel admitted to having been on a drive with Skylar that night. They said that they'd picked her up around 11 p.m. Strangely though, Sheila said to the police that she would be willing to do a lie detector test. Now at this point, police hadn't accused Sheila of lying, so this raised suspicions. Police were also aware that the girls had stated that they'd picked Skylar up at around 11 p.m. However, we know that the CCTV showed that they actually picked her up an hour later. Cracks were starting to appear in their story. Rachel eventually confessed to the police that the girls had all gone to a forest together. However, strangely, she said that they noticed Skylar just run off into the woods. Then Sheila changed her story to match Rachel's. Shockingly, months later, Rachel would go on to confess to stabbing Skylar. She said she did this with Sheila and it had been premeditated for 9 months. After confessing, Rachel led police to Skylar's body in a Pennsylvanian woods. The pair had taken Skylar to the woods and stabbed her to death. They covered her body with branches and it would remain there undetected. When the news of the discovery was released, Sheila actually tweeted, "Rest easy, Skylar, you'll always be my best friend. I miss you more than you could ever know." However, weeks later, she mysteriously tweeted, "We really did go on 3. It transpired that the girls had apparently stabbed her after counting to 3. This tweet was used to build a case against Sheila. As for the motive, Rachel stated that they simply just didn't want to be friends with her anymore. Rachel was sentenced to 30 years in prison for second-degree murder and Sheila was sentenced to life for first-degree murder. Skylar's parents helped to pass Skylar's Law, which means that Amber Alerts have to be issued for all missing children in West Virginia, even if they aren't believed to have been kidnapped. After sharing his lottery winnings with his family, this man was then murdered by his sister-in-law. This case is proof that money does not buy happiness. Jeffrey Dampier was a security guard from Chicago. He lived a normal life until he won a whopping $20 million on the lottery. It truly was a life-changing amount of money, but not in a good way. Him and his wife ended up divorcing and splitting the money 50-50. He eventually met another woman called Crystal Jackson and married her. The pair moved to Florida and opened up a popcorn shop. Now, Jeffrey was very generous with his wife's family. He would buy them gifts and book them cruises to go on. To the outside world, things were picture perfect. However, things were about to take a very dark turn. It turned out that his sisters-in-law were actually struggling financially. Now, Jeffrey offered to sort things out for them. This wasn't entirely selfless though. Jeffrey did this because he was having an affair with his sister-in-law. He was dating his wife's sister, Victoria. However, she was also dating someone else called Nathaniel. Nathaniel decided to concoct a plan to get his hands on some of the money. However, he would need Victoria's help. On July the 26th, Victoria lured Jeffrey round to Nathaniel's house. When he arrived, Nathaniel threatened him with a gun and forced him into a van. He tied Jeffrey up and demanded that he gave him some money. But Jeffrey did not cooperate. Victoria told police that Nathaniel then made her shoot him. The pair abandoned the van with Jeffrey's body inside. They were arrested a few days later. Victoria and Nathaniel were given a life in prison. After the guilty verdict was read out, Victoria said, "Jeffrey forgives me." Jeffrey's wife, Crystal, later said in an interview that the money had been a curse. People are calling this one of the most barbaric murder cases in recent UK history. Rotherham has had its fair share of crime cases. However, this one in particular comes with a massive trigger warning. Adam Clapham was a 31-year-old dad. Adam and another man were believed to have been using substances and were known by a local gang who sold these to them. Things went horribly wrong for the men when they were blamed for £300 of substance money going missing from an address in Rotherham. In September 2022, Adam and the second victim were held captive in a basement in Rotherham. They were held there by 6 gang members and were beaten, stripped and had boiling water poured on them in a 5-hour ordeal. They were hit with hammers and some of the things are so appalling that I cannot even repeat them on this app, so do Google them if you do have a very strong stomach. This is just an extremely distressing case. On the 18th of September, they were both left for dead and tragically Adam died. The other victim was left with over 50 injuries but thankfully did manage to escape. The surviving victim told police how their attackers had laughed as they recorded the incident on their phone. The ringleader of the gang was 24-year-old Arab Yusuf, who ran a substance business from the homes of vulnerable addicts. The judge described the gang as inhumane and jailed them for a total of 155 years. This teacher kidnapped and SA'd his student and said that the devil made him do it. It was March the 13th, 2007. Tad Cummins' wife woke to a note that had been left for her. Tad had written on the note that he was leaving to think. He wrote for her not to call the police. Later that day, a man called Anthony Thomas rang police to report his 15-year-old daughter Elizabeth was missing. Tad worked as a teacher in Tennessee. Elizabeth was actually one of his students. She'd been making the transition from being homeschooled to being taught at a public school, and Tad took quite a liking to the teenager. Other students noticed something was off. One day, Tad started rubbing Elizabeth's shoulders in class. On one occasion, a student even saw him kiss Elizabeth and reported this to another teacher. It took an entire week before Tad was suspended. However, on that week that he was suspended, he was actually allowed to chaperone a school trip that Elizabeth was on. Behind the scenes, Tad was grooming this vulnerable teenager. He would even threaten her with repercussions at school if she didn't obey. He also threatened that he would unalive himself if he couldn't be with her. On the same day that he left the note for his wife, Tad took his wife's car and pulled up at Elizabeth's house. He kidnapped Elizabeth, ensuring that she got in the car by showing her his gun. Now, in order to make sure that the pair weren't caught, Tad actually made her throw her phone off a bridge and he disconnected the GPS in the car. A 38-day manhunt ensued. He drove across 9 different states and got different hotel rooms each night with the teenager. He restricted her food and SA'd her nearly every night. Meanwhile, news outlets across the country were showing these images. They were appealing for help hunting down the pair. Finally, a man named Griffin Barry led police to the kidnapper and his victim. Griffin was a caretaker for a Californian property. He had seen a man and a girl matching the description that he'd seen on the news. They were actually staying in one of the cabins. He rang police and they soon swarmed the property. They arrested Tad and reunited Elizabeth with her family. Tad later claimed that the devil made him do all of this. He would eventually plead guilty and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. This is one of the most sickening, disturbing cases I've ever heard. In February 2010, Jennifer Dougherty went to a sleepover at her friend Angela's house. 6 people were going to be there who she had recently made friends with at a community centre in Greensburg. She was actually really pleased to make these friends as she was described as mentally disabled and she found connecting with people really challenging. The friends were Angela and Ricky, who was her boyfriend, Amber and Melvin, who were expecting a child together, and Peggy and Robert. Little did Jennifer know that Angela was getting very jealous of her. She believed her boyfriend Ricky was trying to flirt with her. It's believed that Ricky had actually spoken on the phone to Jennifer about how he loved her. Angela therefore devised a plan and got the whole group involved. Before heading to the sleepover, Jennifer left her mum a really sweet note. She said, "I hope that you will have a good day at work and also I love you very much." As soon as she walked through the door of Angela's apartment, she was beaten with a towel rack, a crutch and a vacuum cleaner. Then a horrific 36 hours of torture took place. They shaved Jennifer's head and covered her in nail varnish. She was forced to drink detergent, vegetable oil and her own urine. They trampled all over her, stripped her and gagged her. She was then SA'd by Melvin and they burned her eyes with spices. They forced her to write a suicide note and then they stabbed her in the chest, lungs and across her wrists. They wrapped her body in Christmas lights, choked her and then stuffed her into a bin. The following day she was found deceased by a truck driver. Angela was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole as she was 17 at the time. Ricky and Melvin were sentenced to death. Robert, Amber and Peggy all got between 30 and 80 years in prison. Jennifer is remembered by her loved ones as not having a single mean bone in her body. Imagine you're having a normal takeaway evening with a friend. Moments after you wave them off, they're killed. 18-year-old Kim Newson from Lincoln was reported missing by her dad on March the 7th, 2002. Her last known movements had been in the early hours of March the 5th. She had been with her friend Mandy that night. The pair had bought a takeaway from Charcoal Grill in Clasket Gate and then eating kebabs together at Mandy's house. From CCTV, police were able to see that the pair had gone to Mandy's at 1:48 a.m. Kim had then left Mandy's house and gone back to her flat on Monks Road between 2:30 a.m. and 2:45 a.m. It was only roughly 100 yards back to her home, but unfortunately this would be the last journey that Kim would make. It was a complete mystery what had happened to the teenager. A month later, Stephen Hughes was arrested in connection with an unrelated case. Shockingly, police actually found Kim's birth certificate with his bloodied footprint on it in his coat pocket. It transpired that on her short walk home, Stephen had actually hit Kim in the head with an axe. He then dragged her body back to his flat. There, he chopped up her body and dumped her in the river with them. Heartbreakingly, at this time, she was actually pregnant. Stephen tried and failed to cover up his crime. He'd gone to the trouble of cleaning and even redecorating his flat, but it was no match for forensic science. Traces of her blood were found in tiles in the flat. He was sentenced to life in prison, and in 2019, he died in hospital. This bride-to-be was shot to death on her wedding day. After looking forward to this day for her whole life, Gladys Rickard was brimming with excitement. It was the 26th of September 1999, and she looked absolutely stunning in her wedding dress. She was taking photos in her living room with her bridesmaids. The 39-year-old was preparing to get into a limo which would take her to marry her fiancé, accountant James Preston Jr., although tragically she would never make it down the aisle. Gladys had previously dated a man named Augustin Garcia. They had begun dating back in 1992, but he'd been abusive to her and cheated on her, so she left. Although she had clearly met someone new and had moved on, Augustin had been stalking her. Gladys had to report this to the police one day when Augustin turned up at her house and was banging on the windows and doors. In a horrific foreshadowing of events to occur, one day Augustin left a Bible and white flowers on her front lawn. Now, in the Dominican community, this apparently symbolises death. Before Gladys was able to leave the house on her wedding day, Augustin burst in. He had driven from his home in Washington Heights and opened fire at Gladys. She was shot several times before Augustin had to try and reload his weapon. Gladys's brother bravely tackled him to the ground and held him there until police arrived. Sadly, it was too late for Gladys. Augustin was given life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Imagine being wrongfully convicted of killing your wife and children not once but twice. David Cam lived with his wife Kim and their 2 children in Georgetown, Indiana. By all accounts, his marriage was a happy one. David worked as a state trooper for 10 years and was a good father to 7-year-old Bradley and 5-year-old Jill. David left his house on the 28th of September 2000. It was around 7 p.m. and he went to play basketball at a local church. When he returned, he found a hideous scene. His wife and 2 children were shot dead in the garage. At 9:30, he called his former police post to alert them to what happened. Many would say that this was suspicious because he didn't just call 911. David argued that he needed help and they were his people. 35-year-old Kim had been shot in the head. She was found on the floor in her underwear. Her shoes and socks were on the roof of the car. Now, remember this detail because it is going to be important later on in the case. Tragically, little Bradley was on the back seat of the car and he'd seemingly tried to escape. He had been shot in the chest. Like many parents would, David said that he instinctively grabbed little Bradley out of the car and tried to resuscitate him. In doing so, he accidentally contaminated the crime scene. When police arrived, they found David understandably distraught. They noticed spots of blood on his shirt and they decided that this meant that he'd committed the crime. Shortly after, he was arrested and charged with his family's murders. Now, during his first trial, many women came forward to state that David had either engaged in an affair with them or propositioned them. Prosecutors argued that this meant that he had a motive to kill his family. However, the 11 basketball players that David was playing with that night in question said that he had not left the gym. They also hadn't noticed him behaving in a way out of the ordinary. Despite having this alibi, he was actually found guilty and sentenced to 195 years in prison. David managed to appeal this later on and won. The state Supreme Court overruled the decision based upon lack of evidence. However, the story does not end there. In a shocking twist, he was once again wrongfully convicted. In 2000, a sweatshirt containing DNA of an unknown male was found at the crime scene. But prior to David's first trial, this was never tested. It was finally tested in 2005. It matched convicted criminal Charles Boney. Now, he was actually known as the Shoe Bandit. He was known to have a thing for feet and would attack women and steal their shoes. There was also one of Charles's handprints on the car, which placed him directly at the crime scene. Charles was tried and given 225 years in prison for the murders. However, David had a second trial which overlapped with Charles's. Charles claimed that David was the one who shot his family. David obviously still denied having anything to do with it. The prosecution argued that the blood on David's shirt was from being by her when she was killed. However, the defense argued that it could have been from brushing past her when he found his family. Once again, David was convicted and given life in prison. Thankfully, in 2009, this was again overturned. David was ordered to have a third trial. This time, Charles was brought in to testify. He claimed that David had lured him to the house to sell him the weapon, and then it was David who pulled the trigger. Charles claimed that in a panic he tripped over Kim's shoes and put them on the roof of the car. He said that he leaned on the car to check on the children. He said that explained why his handprint was there. However, when questioned, Charles denied touching any of the victims. He was proved to have lied about this by DNA being found on Jill's top, Kim's top, underwear, feet and fingernails. In 2013, David was finally found not guilty on all charges. This axe murder was unsolved for decades until a controversial conclusion to the case. It was winter 1982 in Rochester, New York. Jim Krausnick reported to police that he'd found a hideous scene when he returned from work. It was truly something out of a horror film. His wife Kathy was dead in her bed with an axe in her head. It looked as though somebody had broken into the house. Jim grabbed their 3-year-old daughter and ran to alert a neighbour. The neighbour reported that Jim looked like he had a look of terror on his face. He was struggling to even get his words out. The mystery went on for decades. Who killed the 29-year-old? Heartbreakingly, police had to interview the 3-year-old about what she saw. She apparently told police, "Daddy was gone and Mummy was gone and nobody was there to feed me or dress me." Now, strangely, in the house, although it looked like it was broken into, there were valuable items including Kathy's purse and a tea set. Nothing had actually been taken. Investigators also found that the axe did belong to the couple. Police were suspicious of Jim, and when they arranged a meeting with him, he agreed, but when the time came, he'd actually gone to see family in Michigan. With no actual evidence against Jim or any obvious motive, the case went cold. In 2015, however, there was a review of the case and it was handed to the FBI. A new medical examiner took a look at the case. He reviewed the original autopsy and stated that Kathy actually died at around 3:30 a.m. Now, prosecutors argued that this meant that Jim would have had to have been there when she was killed. They also found a significant amount of Jim's DNA on the crime scene. However, the crime scene was Jim's house, so that's not uncommon. However, prosecutors argued that this was also paired with a lack of DNA evidence of anybody else. There was no evidence of SA on the victim and no evidence of a robbery. They believed this had been a staged break-in. During his trial, Jim pled not guilty. His daughter is now 44 years old and she supported him in court. Jim was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years in prison. His family argue, however, that no justice has been done. Jim maintains his innocence to this day. This man murdered his entire family over a webcam model. Grant Amato from Florida originally worked in the medical field. He had a nursing job in Orlando, but he was actually terminated from this job. It was found that he had improperly administered at least 8 bottles of a sedative to patients. The hospital also suspected him of stealing substances. Now, after he failed to get a new job, he decided to set his sights on a career as a Twitch streamer. He again failed at this. He wasn't earning enough money to live off. He became withdrawn and was spending all of his time on the internet. He started to become obsessed with a webcam model named Sylvia. He ended up telling her about himself in private, expensive chats. He also started showering her with money to impress her. However, this whole time he was claiming that he was a wealthy Twitch streamer. He thought that the pair had a genuine connection and became infatuated. To try and maintain his fake lifestyle that he'd created, he began stealing money off his dad and his brother. He ended up stealing $200,000. Obviously, when his family found out about this, they confronted him. Learning about his infatuation with this model and addiction to speaking to her online, Grant's brother actually paid for him to go to a luxury rehab centre. However, Grant only managed to stay a few days. Grant's dad then gave him an ultimatum. He was allowed to stay back at the family house as long as he got a job, started seeing a therapist, and cut off the model. Grant, however, didn't follow through on his end of the deal. When his dad found that he was still in contact with the model, he kicked Grant out. On January the 24th, 2019, Grant broke into his parents' home and shot his mum. He then waited for his dad to get home and shot him too. His dad fell to the floor and tried to crawl away, but Grant stood over him and shot him. Once his dad was deceased on the floor, he picked up his hand and used his fingerprint to get into his phone. He then lured his brother to the house. Hours later, his brother arrived and he shot him in the face. Grant actually placed the weapon on his brother in order to try and frame him for the deaths. Grant pleaded not guilty but was sentenced to life without parole.
This little song, run, rabbit, run, rabbit, run, run, run.
These are the top 3 most baffling episodes of Unsolved Mysteries. Number 3 is House of Terror. In this episode, a French man and his entire family disappear. They've seemingly just vanished without a trace, and then a hideous discovery is made. One family member has still to this day never been found, and for me, just the amount of unanswered questions makes this one really unsettling. Number 2 is Death in Oslo. I actually did a YouTube video on this case because it fascinates me so much. Basically, a mystery woman is found deceased in a hotel room. At first, it appears that it's a self-unaliving, but then as you go through the episode, you realise there's loads of evidence to suggest that it might not be. Who was this woman? Why did she use a fake name and address? And why was she killed? My number 1 is Mystery on the Rooftop. It's the Ray Rivera case, and if you're not familiar with it, basically Ray leaves his house in a rush and then disappears. He leaves a bizarre rambling note at his house which makes little sense. Then he turns up dead in a building with a hole in the roof. Let me know in the comments what your favourite episodes of Unsolved Mysteries are. This is how a woman's quick thinking saved her own life. On the 22nd of August at around 5 p.m, a customer was just minding their own business at a petrol station in northern Arizona. The customer was then signalled to by a woman. The woman passed the customer a note begging for their help. The yellow post-it note stated, "Help, call 911, blue Honda van." There was also a phone number and the direction that they were apparently headed in. The woman had been allegedly kidnapped 170 miles away in Phoenix. The shocked customer called the police straight away and described to them what the woman was wearing and what her alleged captor looked like. Police immediately tracked them down and detained 41-year-old Jacob Wilhoit. He has now been charged with threatening, aggravated assault, unlawful imprisonment, kidnapping, and other crimes. Jacob had been allegedly wearing a wig and posing as an Uber driver when he kidnapped the woman. It's believed that he then put her in his van and tied her up with zip ties. Police stated the victim is still shaken up, but I think she did an amazing job and ended up doing everything right. Notorious BTK killer is a prime suspect in 2 unsolved murders. Dennis Rader, the convicted BTK killer, is back in the headlines after officers have been digging up his former backyard. The 1976 missing persons case of Cynthia Kinney from Oklahoma has sparked the search. The investigation has apparently uncovered possible connections to other missing people and unsolved murders. These have taken place in Kansas and Missouri, and police believe they are potentially linked to Dennis. The FBI are now looking at matching up pieces of evidence that they have with pieces of clothing that are in Polaroids that Dennis took. They may be able to then see if the pieces of evidence match the DNA of the victims. They are looking in particular at a distinctive red blanket, which was in a Polaroid that Dennis took. They believe that this may belong to Shauna Garber. Shauna was actually 22 when she was AR'd and killed in 1990. Her body was recently identified in 2021, hence the advancements in this case. An influencer has been found dead near a burned vehicle. In Austell, Georgia, on the 23rd of August, the body of a 22-year-old Instagram influencer was found. At around 12:18 p.m, the fire service arrived to the scene where a vehicle was fully engulfed in flames. Police then attended the address that the vehicle was registered to and found out that the owner's daughter, Beauty Couch, had been missing since the previous day. They then searched the area of the car and found her body. The influencer had over 150k on Instagram and regularly posted beautiful photos. Officers are stating that they are suspecting foul play. A missing woman has been found and is now charged with falsely reporting her own murder. 37-year-old Margaret Sweeney from North Carolina was recently reported missing. In a bizarre twist in this case, she's now facing charges related to faking her own murder. She's facing the charges of causing false report to a police station, false report of death or serious injury, and obstructing law enforcement officers. It's believed that initially police received a call which insinuated that Margaret was endangered or deceased. The day after, police were actually able to identify where she was by pinging her phone. She was discovered safe and unharmed. It's now alleged that the woman made anonymous third-party false reports to a friend and the Department of Social Services that she'd been murdered. Police at the moment are unsure why she may have done this, but they did say it does appear that there was some domestic issues with the boyfriend. This true crime murder case is honestly like something out of a very far-fetched film. Rachel Del Tondo was suspended as a teacher in Pennsylvania. Rachel was seemingly happy with her millionaire fiancé. However, in 2016, she was actually discovered in a parked, steamed-up car with a 17-year-old student. This student was Sheldon Jeter. Now, Rachel managed to convince the police officer that the pair were just talking and not to file a report because she didn't want to make her fiancé angry. Now, later in 2017, things did come to the surface. The report ended up being filed just in case anyone got wind of it. However, this was then leaked to the media and obviously the school that Rachel was working at. Rachel was suspended pending an investigation and her fiancé broke up with her. Bizarrely, 2 months after the suspension, Rachel actually ended up in a relationship with Sheldon's older brother, Bolton. Now, fast forward to May the 13th, 2018, Rachel went for some ice cream. Little did she know she was being watched. She ended up being dropped off at her parents' house at around 10:30, but she was gunned down at the bottom of their driveway. She was shot between 10 and 12 times. Now, although nobody has been convicted for Rachel's murder yet, Sheldon is now classed as the prime suspect. In another strange twist of events, in 2021, Sheldon was actually convicted of murdering his friend Tyreek Pugh, again after going for ice cream. Rachel's murder has actually been very hard to solve due to the lack of witnesses. Frustratingly, the murder weapon was also never found. However, GPS and CCTV footage has built a strong circumstantial case against Sheldon. It showed an alleged pattern of stalking Rachel around the time of her murder. These are the top 3 most heart-wrenching true crime documentaries. Number 3 for me is Goodnight Sugar Babe. For me, this documentary is just so heartbreaking due to the amount of horrific themes involved and also just the vulnerability of the victim. It includes themes of CSA and the brutal murder and torture of a woman who is a young mum and also has learning disabilities. Number 2 is the trials of Gabriel Fernandez. Anything with kids involved, I personally just find so heartbreaking. This documentary series looks at the brutal murder of an 8-year-old boy. What makes it even worse is the horrific abuse that he suffered from his mum and his mum's boyfriend. He was also just let down in so many ways by the systems that are meant to keep him safe. And then number 1 for me is Dear Zachary. This documentary has a huge amount of interviews with people who knew the victim, family members, friends, and also a lot of home video footage. It's just such a real personal insight into this family, which I feel makes it even more heart-wrenching. I obviously won't spoil what happens in the documentary, but if this one doesn't make you cry, I don't know what will.